Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sally Berkery, and I'm the Managing Director of CEW UK. The way in which customers buy products is changing rapidly, and with a huge shift to online purchasing during the last 12 months, as we discussed, creating meaningful, intuitive, and usable online experience has never been more important. What does that mean, and where do you start? Today, we are welcoming back CEW partners Very and Kate Rylance, who is UX Research and Design Manager at the Very Group. With a background in consumer and organizational psychology, Kate is passionate about the why and uses this in her day-to-day work to improve the way that the organization thinks about the digital experience of its customers. Today, Kate will discuss what it means to be truly customer-centric. She'll run through some UX best practice and top tips, some case studies from Very, and an intro into understanding consumer psychology. I can't wait. Kate will try to answer your questions at the end, so please do pop these in the Q&A panel at the bottom. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sally, and hello everyone. Great to be here. I'm just going to take a pause now and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so let's get started. Hi, I'm Kate. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here. As Sally said, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so diving into all things user experience and exploring what you can do to make sure the experiences that you're creating for customers are truly customer-centric. Before we get into that, let me introduce myself. I've not been here before, so I guess I'm a lot of different things to different people, but I'm Kate Rylance, as Sally mentioned. I'm UX Design and Research Manager at the Very Group. And I've also got a background in psychology, so I've always been fascinated in why people do what they do and how you can create experiences based on that understanding of consumer psychology and behaviour. I guess I just wanted to start and kind of, reflect on, it's been a strange 12 months, right? The context in which we're all operating at. Things have changed massively. The world shut down, we've stayed at home, and that means that our behaviour as consumers has changed greatly too, which has a massive impact on how people shop and buy products. So as Sally mentioned in the intro there, I truly believe the way that we are shopping has changed, maybe for the better, but it's had a massive evolution. And what that means for us and my team specifically that, looks at UX is it has never been more important to create intuitive online experiences for your customers, because what once maybe would have been a Saturday afternoon with your friends and family in town looking for the latest beauty products is now, maybe with your mobile in hand on a very small screen trying to get that same experience. So super important, and hopefully you will learn some top tips on how to kind of adapt to that and what a great online experience looks like. So I thought I'd just start at the beginning with, what is UX, just for anyone that's not familiar with that. It stands for user experience. With this growth in online, there has been a massive growth in UX teams as well. So I'm sure many of you have maybe UX designers or UX researchers. But if not, that's okay too. What you're going to hear today are, top tips that you can take away and inherit with or without dedicated UXers in your company. So UX stands for user experience, and I want to start with a little story around ketchup, which probably seems a bit strange and maybe off topic. It's a bit of a well-debated example in the UX industry, but it's a great story that kind of shows what UX can mean for a product. So if I start on the left here with the glass ketchup bottle, hopefully many of you remember the glass bottle. It was designed, it looked elegant, looked really nice on the shelf. However, when customers actually went to use it, it was a little bit of a nightmare. So they partook in some customer research and actually observed people using ketchup for their dinner and went and sat with families. And it just wasn't usable. People were banging it on the table, the sauce was stuck at the bottom. And what they realized was, although they've created something that visually looked appealing, the user experience of actually getting the ketchup out wasn't great. So what that meant was they actually reinvented that product, and you'll probably be familiar with the squeezy bottle on the right there, which, although maybe doesn't look aesthetically pleasing as the glass bottle, it absolutely kind of fixes those user needs, and that in a nutshell is what it's about. Visual aesthetics in an online experience is really, really important, but what we'll discuss is how important usability and the actual usability of the product is, as well as just things looking nice and appealing on the eye. So what makes a good experience? I guess this is a good place to start. You know, we know what the definition is, but how do you within your companies create great experiences? And I guess digitally, which is obviously where we operate, so our team at Very kind of own the online websites and the apps. It's all around how you make those apps and websites usable, accessible, and memorable to your customers. So I just wanted to start here, really. This is not mine. This is the link to the articles at the bottom, but it's called the UX Hierarchy of Needs. And it kind of shows the different levels and elements that you as companies and organizations can go through to ensure that you're creating the best online experience as possible. So the way this works is we kind of start in the middle and work outwards. So the first thing you can do is focus on utility. So utility is all around how useful your product or experience is. And that is so, so important. The thing you're doing or your experience has to have a reason to exist. If it doesn't solve a customer problem or it doesn't meet a customer need, you'll potentially spend lots of money creating things that, you know, people don't use, or we thought was a really good idea, but then we wonder why it's got low uptake. So making sure you're really tapping into that need is the place to start, for sure. The next sphere is all around usability, and this kind of refers to the ease of use of your websites and apps. So can customers log on to your online experience and do the things they're trying to do easily, intuitively, and without friction? If they can't, it's very likely that they'll maybe give up or go to a different website or go to a competitor. So usability and ease of use is the second most important thing. The third thing is then desirability, and this is where we get into the more aesthetic look and feel. So things like content, the visuals you're using on your experience, these all influence desirability. And it's the thing that separates market leaders and your competitors. So it is really, really important that the desirable element of the website is there. And then finally, one that we're probably most familiar with, brand experience. So all those spheres that I've talked through so far kind of all mix together to give the brand experience to your customers. So does the customer feel good about your product and company, and what are kind of the perceptions? So that's a real kind of whistle-stop tour. There are a couple of common mistakes that we see people make time to time, and I think the most common one is maybe focusing on the desirability and the brand experience before thinking about the usability and utility. It's really easy to kind of talk about what looks nice and what's going to create the right experience, but to truly, be customer centric and create usable experiences, we must start in the middle and kind of work out. It's a bit like I'm peeling an onion, I guess. So I just wanted to share some of the UX principles that we use day to day at Very. I know kind of case studies can be really helpful in these things, and I wanted to bring it to life. So as a team at Very, we have 5 UX principles, and every time we design anything for our website, we make sure we're in check with these 5. So the first one is customer centricity, an obvious one, hopefully, but this is all around the fact that we seek to understand behaviours, emotions and needs of our customers, and we design with evidence. So we don't come up with the ideas and then test them with customers. The ideas in themselves are coming from the data and the insight that we already have about their needs. And a really great example of this, I don't know how many of you are actually customers yourselves on the Very website, but I just wanted to bring an example to life of where we've truly kind of initiated a customer-led experience change. So we're in the midst of this at the moment, but it's something called change model. And what we noticed through all our customer research and data was a huge trial barrier to online shopping was the fact that obviously you can't try things on. It's really hard to know whether things are going to fit or not. You're looking at the model and thinking, that doesn't really look like me. How on earth am I meant to make a purchase decision off the back of it? So we had lots and lots of insights saying that this was a real problem for customers. What we actually did was work with our tech teams and our development teams to ideate on lots of different ways we could fix this, which resulted in the ability to choose your own model. So it's launched now for Nike products. Obviously, this is more clothing related. It could absolutely roll out in other industries beyond fashion. But we've now launched the ability for customers to be able to actually choose a model that suits their size, need, and that they can more easily relate to, which has seen not only an increase in the purchases that we've had of those items, but a massive decrease in returns too, which has been great. The second principle that I wanted to touch on was honesty. Everything we design with integrity, and we aim to offer complete transparency in what we provide and how we communicate to our customers. With competitors and the online market growing massively, customers having trust in you as a brand and seeing you as someone that operates with integrity is really, really important for that customer loyalty and repetition of purchasing. The third one is accessible and inclusive. So when we're designing online experiences, we want to create experiences that are available to all users, regardless of circumstance, ability, location, or device. I did a bit of homework, and I know accessibility and diversity has been quite a contentious, hot debated topic in the beauty industry. So I just wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this one specifically. So in terms of accessibility and how you create diverse experiences, I just wanted to kind of dwell on the point here that this isn't just making sure, the beauty product in itself caters for all and has different, matches different skin tones or shades. It's about your experience needing to be inclusive too. So there are 13.9 million people registered in the UK alone with different impairments. And if your experience isn't catering for them, obviously you're excluding a massive population in the UK, and it's obviously shutting the door to you from a business perspective too. So overall, I won't go into detail on all of these, but there are 4 main kinds of impairment types that as we're designing experiences, we should cater for. And they are visual, cognitive, auditory, and physical. So I could probably do a whole talk on accessibility and designing experiences that are accessible in itself. So I'm not going to go into massive detail here, but if you do have any questions, we can definitely talk about it in the Q&A. Currently, only 4% of businesses are actually actively creating products for people with disabilities or thinking about accessibility as well. So we've got a massively long way to go here, I think, in terms of being a truly inclusive community. I just wanted to also point out the thought around kind of impairments having a span of both permanent to temporary. So often if we think of maybe like a visual impairment, we think about maybe, someone who's got full sight loss or is registered as blind. What does that mean for our experience? How do we navigate them through the website if they're using assistive technology like a screen reader? They can't actually see our images, or they can't, choose their shade of foundation potentially. But there's also temporary impairments, and then there's a massive scale here. So a permanent would be your full sight loss, but a temporary might be you just simply buying online in the sunlight, and things like color contrast are really, really important. Similar with auditory. So whilst the permanent impairment that you're designing for might be someone who's deaf, a temporary element of that might be someone who's on a really noisy commute on the tube, and things like being able to transcribe or offer subtitles on your experience, for whether that's permanent or temporary, are really, really important. And finally, I just wanted to call out a couple of examples that I've seen of in this space. So this is maybe not necessarily on the website, but in their actual product. So you may well have heard of these already. But Herbal Essences have just done a lot in the visual impairment space around, how can they cater for people with low or fully sight loss. So they were working with a sample of people where it's really tricky if you can't see to differentiate between shampoo and conditioner. So they've done a lot to transcribe and raise the actual back of their product to cater for that. And on the right here, where you can see the concealer, this was addressed at someone with maybe more of a physical need. So what would the experience of opening and putting on concealer be like, maybe if you've only got one arm to be able to do that and you can't use both of your hands to kind of screw the cap off and be able to do it in the normal way. So there's lots of examples. We're making big moves in this space, but as I mentioned with the stats, we've still got a long way to go. Simplicity is also really important. So anything we do, we aim to reduce complexity and just make the experience as simple as possible, removing friction. And finally, consistency. So again, potentially an obvious one, but when we're designing online experiences, we strive to produce designs which are consistent, they feel the same, and we use common patterns as much as possible. So often we might want to kind of innovate and break the mold and be different to our competitors, which is absolutely great, but we do have to kind of be cognizant of the fact that the way people use other websites and the way they're interacting with maybe our competitors will shape what they expect from us. So sometimes actually having that consistency can actually help the ease of use for your experience. A question I often get is, well, how can I tell if my organization is truly customer centric? What are maybe some of the quick litmus tests that I can do to see where I am on this customer centricity journey? These aren't all of the questions, but these are just some things from speaking to different organizations or from the work we do at Very that can be a really good sign of where you are in your organization from a customer centricity point of view. So question one is, when you're thinking about changes to your experience, your website, your apps, are you talking about outcomes or outputs? And what I mean by that is there's a lot of talk in the industry around how can you shift from chats that evolve around, we need to ship this feature, or so-and-so is doing this really cool thing, let's copy them, to actually talking about the outcome for customers. So rather than we need to do this feature, an example of that would be having a roadmap which just states we need to solve this problem for customers. And it's something we've been working on really closely with the squads at Berry to figure out how we can actually produce problem and outcome-based roadmaps versus focusing on the specific features we want to ship. Second question, what customer-related targets do we have? Is your company, targeted on its customer experience? An example that we have is NPS, so that's a really important measure for us, and we are targeted across the whole business on our NPS score, as well as things like profit and conversion. So that's a really great sign that if you are kind of having reward schemes based on customer centricity, that can be a really good sign that you're heading in the right direction. Here's a good one. Question number 3, how many times have I spoken to an actual customer in the last 6 months? So obviously a big part of customer centricity is around the research that you do and keeping close to your customer. So if you're maybe sitting there thinking, gosh, it's been a few years, or maybe I never have, that's absolutely fine, but it's a really good place to start, because what we think is the right thing to do versus what customers actually need can often be very different. And the final question is, at what part of the process is our research taking place? So if you are doing research already, that's great. Something that we often see is we can often think the job is done if we're just kind of validating our ideas at the end of a product process or life cycle. And a move to being a truly customer-centric organization shows us doing research at all touch points versus just a bit of a checkbox at the end. So again, not exhaustive, would love to talk more about them, but there are a couple of things that can normally give you a good insight into where you're doing on that customer-centric maturity scale. Just in terms of at what part of the process is our research taking place, just wanted to share this with you. This is called the double diamond. It's a methodology. You can read loads about it if you've not heard of it already. But it's a well-known kind of UX and design thinking process, which shows us that when we are going from an idea to a solution, the kind of steps that we should take. And it's called a double diamond because, as you can see, it's shaped as a diamond, and we should diverge and converge as we go through an innovation process. So again, I'm not going to touch on this in too much detail, but I think the things that are most important are, as you can see, there's two spaces here. So as you're building an experience or taking on a new piece of innovation, the first place you should always start is the problem space. So this is where you work with customers, you really understand the problems you're trying to solve, what are the user needs, what are my customers' motivations. It's at that point when you go into the solution space, and then you start to ideate, prototype, come up with ideas and go big on, how could we solve this? So I guess the common problems we maybe see in this space is companies often start with the ideate space. So we can go straight into a solution without really understanding who we're designing for or who we need to cater for. Or you can see people spend a lot of time in the problem space and then maybe go straight to one solution that doesn't diverge on all the possible solutions that we could do. So yeah, just an interesting model and an interesting kind of call out that there is two spaces that we should go through when we're designing experiences. And that leads me on really nicely to the types of research methods we use. So as we mentioned at the beginning, my role at Very sits across UX design and UX research. So I'm lucky enough to work with a really talented group of researchers who come from all sorts of different backgrounds, psychology, sociology. And at Very, we are really, really lucky to have lots of different research methods that we can utilise. So obviously we can't use it during COVID, but we've got a UX lab that you can see in the top left there. So we'll bring customers in and actually watch them behaving with our experience. We've got the ability to eye track. So just to the right there, you can see the difference between how customers behave based on the item they're shopping for. So that's really interesting. We know that if you're shopping for a dress, you have very different behaviors to if you're shopping for a TV or a wardrobe. And similar to, when you're shopping for a beauty product or skincare, that's a very, very different behavior again. So eye tracking really allows us to dig into that. Bottom left there is a field study. So we also go out, and that was me on the delivery vans, actually delivering parcels to understand the end part of our process and how our online experiences tie together with our offline experiences. And we do lots more. So we do WhatsApp studies, click tests. We do all sorts of things to really get under the skin of the problems we're trying to solve and make sure that the solutions we're building are going to be fit for purpose when we launch them. And my final part, really, just something I learned really on in my kind of UX career, was what people say and do are totally different things. And that's really, really important. So if you're wanting to understand your customers, you can't just rely on, a simple interview and speaking to them, because what people say and do are really different. And sometimes you just need to observe that behavior. As humans, we're not very good at articulating our true behavior through words. So this is where psychology and understanding of consumer behavior can be really, really important. So I just wanted to bring to life a couple of psychology theories, really, to end on, that could be really useful for whatever experiences you're currently working on in your organisations. So the first theory is choice overload. So this is the really, simple concept that the more choices we add, the harder it is for our customers to make a decision. So on the surface, this seems, relatively straightforward, but actually we often have an urge to add more and have bigger product ranges and add more to the website. And that can sometimes hinder the experience we're creating. So a really great study on this, you may well have already seen this, is a study on choice overload by Sheena Ingar, and it was actually around jars of jam. So what they did was they set up 2 separate stalls, and one stall had 6 jars of jam and the other stall had 24 jars of jam. And what they were looking at is, 1, how many people stop and browse at these stalls, and 2, how many people actually go on to make a purchase. And what they found was really, really interesting, and kind of started this exploration of choice online. So in terms of how many people stopped to have a look, when there were more jars, 60% of people stopped versus the 40% when there were only 6 jars. However, when you actually look at the data of how many people made a purchase, that changes massively. So when there were more jars, although people were showing interest and stopping to have a look, only 3% of people actually purchased. And we've done some similar things on very, obviously not with jars of jam, but around exploring the impact that choice can have on consumers. So one example here is the perception of choice. So, you know, obviously as a retailer or as someone selling different products, you might not want to reduce your range, but you can even do things around the perception of choice and minimizing that. So a very, very tiny example here that you can see is how many products are actually shown in a gallery. So it didn't change the number of products we actually stocked, but we just visually made that look more kind of easy to consume and reduce that cognitive load. And that change alone saw a 1.1% increase to conversion. It works the opposite way as well. So we do a lot of A/B testing and exploring with our experiences, and we found that actually when we implemented something called infinite scroll, so that concept of when you're going through a website, rather than clicking next at the end, just having an infinite gallery, again, because that increased choice, that actually was negative, and that impacted conversion negatively by 0.2%. So again, the same theory that less is sometimes more. And finally, another thing just to kind of call out on this is around things like product count. So something that we're still kind of exploring and thinking about is, you know, if you look at the website today, or maybe you've got an example in your world where we sometimes show product count and how many products are in a certain category. But is this useful, or is this maybe overwhelming customers before they've even jumped in? The second theory is gaze queue of attention. So this is a really interesting kind of behavioral theory where, as humans, we automatically focus our orientation to the same object that others are looking at. So, you know, you can't really do it on screen and mimic it on here, but if I were in physical presence with you and I was to maybe point over there and look, as you know, humans, you would naturally follow my gaze and look where I was looking. And this can be really heavily influence customer behavior too. So here's kind of an example of one of this study. You might know the famous Sunsilk study that was ran. It was a marketing campaign that A/B tested 2 different approaches. And as you can see, the only difference in the marketing ad that they put out was the physical gaze of where the model was looking. So you can see on the left one there, she's looking at the product, the Sunsilk, and on the right one there, she's looking straight forward. And that's got a heat map over it. So where you can see red on the left, you can see how much difference that's had with people actually looking at the product. Whereas on the right, they've looked just straight at her face versus following her visual cue. So again, you know, that there's some examples on the right there, but this can have a real kind of impact on how we behave and how we navigate through experiences. The third one is change blindness. So this is the concept by which observers often fail to notice large changes when the change coincides with a brief visual description. So sounds a bit wordy, but I'll show you an example that gets straight to the point. So I want you to take a look at this image that you can see on the screen here. I'll just leave it on for around 5 seconds or so. And I'm going to flip the image, and I want you to just have a think about what changes and if you notice the change. So just take it all in and have a look for me. Okay, so just have a think what's changed. it's so much easier to do this bit in person. We normally have a great old chat around, has anyone been able to spot the difference? So if you haven't, you will actually notice, I'll just bring up a circled, it's the massive propeller. So that was missing in the second image. And what this kind of shows is just by adding that black disruption, which mimics disruption, we can often miss things in an experience, or our brains can often trick us into not realizing maybe things have changed or appeared on the screen. So just to bring that back into our online experience example, there's a couple of things on Very as well that we've noticed in this space. So the first one is around error messaging. So error messaging is obviously really, really important to customers. And interestingly, we noticed that the way in which we were serving errors to customers, if they weren't selecting a size or a color and just trying to add to basket, they weren't actually seeing the error message. So although we thought, you know, it's really big, it's in red, obviously everyone's going to see it, because they were distracted with other things and they were just focusing on the bottom of the screen and trying to add to basket, that they just weren't seeing it. So we did a small A/B test where we just removed that barrier of change blindness. And as you can see, rather than the red error message, we just forced a friendly reminder, don't forget to pick your size. And the result of that A/B test, as you can see there in terms of demand impact, was absolutely massive for such a small change. And it's not always about reinventing the wheel here. Sometimes just a deep understanding of behaviour can really help improve and remove some of that friction. Another example was around our cookie messaging. So again, not necessarily a super glamorous example, but we noticed through research in our UX lab that people actually weren't seeing the cookie banner. So although we made it really big to make it visual for customers, because again, they were distracted and just working through other things and not really taking in the whole screen, they weren't seeing it, and that meant they weren't closing it. So the real estate they had on the screen to actually do their whole experience and shop with us was tiny. So again, we made some changes there and saw a huge impact. And then finally, I just wanted to close with, you know, what are some of the things that can get in your way when you're designing experiences, or when you're, you know, being customer centric and taking part in research? What are some of the risky things to look out for? And really, the main kind of thing that I want to touch on here is human bias. And I'm not sure if you've seen this infographic before. It can be quite overwhelming, but there are actually 188 biases that we all have as humans that impact our thoughts and actions daily. And I guess the key here, we can never get rid of them. It's our brain's way of kind of making quick decisions and taking shortcuts. But having an awareness of our biases that we hold when we're making data decisions in our business, in our organization, can really help us push past them and make the right decisions. So you'll be glad to know I'm not going to go through all 188 of them today. Again, happy to talk more about them, but I just wanted to call out a few key ones that I think are crucial when you're kind of, you know, working in big teams and iterating on your experiences. So the first one is probably the most common bias of them all, which is confirmation bias. So this is our tendency, and we all do it, to search for and favour information in a way that confirms what we believe already. So if we've got a really cool idea, or if we think an experience should work a certain way, we will naturally search for information or conduct research or read the data in a way that kind of backs our own thoughts up, because we don't want the complexity in our brains of all the different options. But being aware of that and actually pushing past that can really help you create amazing experiences for your customers versus stick to your original thought or perception that you had. The second one is consensus bias. So this is the fact that we see our own choices and judgments as very common to others. So maybe if I've had a really great experience with a retailer, or if I have a specific opinion about how an experience should be, we naturally assume that everyone else will have consensus with that, and how I think is the same as everyone else. But actually, back to the diversity and accessibility point, your customers are so diverse and so different that we have to push past that, and we have to assume that people are different to us, and partake in the right data and research to really understand that. The third one is hindsight bias. So this doesn't really take us down the wrong track, but it does kind of stop us sometimes from doing maybe research or discovery. And this is the bias where we tend to convince ourselves that we would have accurately predicted something before it happened. So an example of this would be, maybe if you've got researchers that work in your organization, maybe they've done a big project and they're playing back the results, and your mind kind of goes, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen anyway, or oh, we already knew that. And that can really impact your customer centricity as a business, because we do tend to think that in hindsight, we knew that already. And then the final one is the Ikea Effect. So this is, it's based on Ikea furniture, and it's the bias that, people place a disproportionately high value on products that they partially created. So, if you've got your flat pack wardrobe from Ikea, because you've put it together, you love it more when it's up. And that's the same, when you're building experiences. If it's you doing the design, or if it's your idea in the first place, you naturally will probably place a higher value on the idea or the experience than maybe your customers would. So again, just a couple of things to think of. So as I said, we can't ever remove bias. It's not about, being stifled into paralysis here, but just being aware of some of the typical ones, and being open and honest with your team can be a really great barrier to remove. And I think that's me. So just to do a very quick recap, if you've got any questions on any of that, we've got some time left, I think, for Q&A, which we'll go to after this. So please pop them in now. But just to recap then, great experiences start with being useful and usable. So as we talked about, desirability and visual aesthetics are really, really important, but we have to get usefulness and usability right as a core before we start to innovate. Point 2 is conducting customer research and discovery is key to building great experiences. If we don't do that, we won't be meeting our customers' needs and solving real problems for them. Understanding human bias can prevent easy mistakes. So we've only scratched the surface on this, but just being aware of them and kind of checking yourself on them can be really, really useful. And great research looks at so much more than what people say. So we tapped very, very briefly into a few kinds of behavioural psychology theories there. But I guess, that is a key message to just end on, that what people say and do is very different. So the best way to understand your customers is to truly triangulate on your research methods and make sure you're understanding behaviour as well as just kind of verbal opinion. And that's me. So thanks so much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and head over to the Q&A to see if there's any questions. So just bear with me while I switch over. Oh, there's quite a few, which is awesome. So let me, I'll just start at the top and work my way through. So please do carry on if you've got any more. So the first one is around, are there any special UX tools you have implemented for beauty and personal care products? So really interesting question. It's actually a big priority that we're working on at the moment in terms of how I think I mentioned in the eye tracking study, what people expect is very, very different, but we are just working through that at the moment. So hopefully we'll have more to share on what that looks like. But the thing we're needing to bear in mind is it's really important to differentiate the experience, but back to the point around consistency, people also need to know that we're a retailer and have that consistent experience. So we're doing some discovery at the moment on what differentiation looks like. One key kind of snippet that I can give you on that is around kind of when people are selecting their colour type. So we know that obviously if you think of things like makeup, knowing the colour and the shade is really, really important. So, you know, it's very different from selecting a size 8 or 10 in clothing. So how can we bring that to life would be one example that we're exploring. Next question. Just jumped around there, sorry. Do you have any advice for dealing with negative feedback in the UX experience? So I'm going to assume this one is around, you know, maybe you've tested something with customers and it's not gone so well, or you've maybe not got the feedback you want. But I think this comes back to the whole bias thing, right? So the way we kind of work at Very is there's not really a thing as bad feedback, because actually if we've conducted some research with customers and something hasn't really performed as expected, learning that as early on in that process, you know, before you've launched and before you've put the money into the code and launched it is great. So I think one thing would be our attitudes around it. We have a fast fail culture, and we see failure as learning. But I think, you know, as long as you understand why they're giving that negative feedback, you can then iterate on that and take it as a learning to make your product even better. So I would see it as a blessing in disguise, and just find that as early as possible, because it's much better to know before you go live than once you're live. Do you think it's important to consider the age of customers, and how might that affect their UX journey and preferences? Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So we do have quite a broad customer base at Very, and we do kind of capture that data. I think this is where I know the designers in my team would say, this is where it's really tricky, because you kind of have to, for someone as big as Very, you have to design experiences that are inclusive but work for everyone. So we haven't got any specific kind of insight on age, but I think to my point around accessibility, if you are designing with those accessibility principles in mind, you will cater for all, and that could be age, it could be gender, it could be people with different kind of you know, impairments that we spoke about. So I wouldn't say it's specifically age, but I do think inclusive design is a really important principle. Okay, let's have a look. How many people would you need research from in order to affect a change? $1 million question. This probably sounds like a get out of jail free card, but it honestly depends on the type of research you're doing. So we probably don't have time to kind of go into this, but it's based on whether you're looking at an attitude or a behavior. So if you're wanting to understand a customer attitude, we often do what we call qualitative research, and that means we have a much smaller sample. So even talking to, you know, 5 users and doing a usability test can predict 80% of the usability problems. If you're wanting to understand a behavior, so that would be, if I implement this change, how many people will do X? That's where you go much bigger scale, and that's where we do, you know, more large sample quantitative research, which is in the thousands. So there's not a magic number, I'm afraid. It really does depend on the type of research and the question you're answering. Okay, on to Cara. Hi, Cara. Is the gaze function based on where the mouse is placed on the screen? No, it's not actually. So eye tracking is a really clever piece of kit, and it actually bounces off the infrared of your eye. So it's harder to do remotely, but if we were in a world where we could go in our UX lab, we have a piece of software, we use Toby, but others are available, and it's just a bar that either clips onto the mobile phone or the desktop, and it's as clever as it uses infrared to bounce off people's retina, and it actually maps their physical gaze. So yeah, that's so much more than obviously just the mouse movement, and it means we can track it on mobile as well, because we know, especially at Very, you know, over 80% of our volume comes on mobile, so we prioritize that over desktop. Okay, so who would Kate say demonstrate best practice in the beauty industry in relation to UX? Good question. I was actually looking at different examples before I came on today, and Glossier have come up as best practice UX. So they did a massive benchmarking against a couple of different companies. I'll have to remember, I think it was Glossier, Lush, a few different ones were involved, and Glossier came up top. And that wasn't just because they're doing, you know, really innovative things. Back to my point around usability, just the way you use that experience is seamless. It just works. It's easy. You can filter, you can search. So I'd say they're one to watch in that space. Fantastic presentation, thank you. You're welcome. Do you think it's important to focus more on mobile UX than desktop? Is mobile the future? I don't think you can answer this globally, to be honest. I think back to being customer centric, it just depends on you know, your audience. There's not a one size fits all answer. At Very, we constantly, you know, look at our data, and mobile is the future. So many more people are using mobile, and that's changed rapidly over even the past 2 to 3 years. So for us, our focus is there, but I'd say to truly know that it depends on, you know, your own customer numbers. But for us, we place the majority of our focus on there, and that's not to say desktop isn't important, but it's just to meet the demand of where our customers are shopping. Okay, second to last one. So, do you think the cosmetic industry has a bigger UX challenge, especially on something like choice overload? It's tricky, isn't it? I think, I'm not sure if it's a bigger challenge. I think it's maybe the evolution that the industry is facing as a whole that makes it feel maybe a little bit bigger than in some other areas. I think it's absolutely doable, but I think when you think about how people have maybe consumed beauty in the past, you know, maybe it is your more traditional going into the shops and having that counter experience and seeing all that. So I think the big thing we need to face into is how we can replicate that online. And I think we can, like with all the technology we've got today. I kind of refuse to believe that we can't mimic that. But I just think we need to go on that journey, and it's something we're looking at absolutely in terms of how we differentiate that experience. And I think we need to kind of, you know, learn from that off-site experience, figure out why that's so great for people, and figure out how we translate that online. And then last but by no means least, is UX different for B2C and B2B? I don't know that it is really. I mean, I can only really speak from my own kind of perspective, but I think the principles and the process and the methodologies are probably the same. Obviously, your end user's just different. But I think the concept of, you know, getting really close to them, researching with them, understanding them is the same. Obviously, you've just got a different person at the end of it that you're catering for. And I think that's me done. So there's no more questions. So it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. I will hand over to Sally to close the event.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, thank you all of you for your time this afternoon, and Kate for these amazing insights. I think I've missed my calling. It's such a fascinating topic. My daughter's doing psychology A-level, and I find myself kind of gazing at her textbooks. I think it's such an interesting job that you have. If any of you have any further questions you'd like to ask, or you come away this evening and think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, just let us know and we'll send those on. A little bit of housekeeping. There's always a bit of housekeeping and nagging from me. I just wanted to flag the upcoming events, which can be seen on the website. Next week, we've got an amazing workshop with Peter Sir, who is an expert coach with 25 years of marketing leadership experience, which is going to be focusing on imposter syndrome, which unbelievably is a feeling that 70% of us display at some time or other. And later in the month, we're going to be taking a look at marketing to older audiences. We have an event with Tribe Dynamics on influencer marketing, which is always very popular. And then we have our exclusive insight session from our partners at Google. I think that's on the 25th, but I might be lying, but I wouldn't want to intentionally. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Do keep in touch. We hope to see you soon, maybe even in person, I hope at some point. And thank you once again, Kate and the Very Group, for your support. We've loved having you this afternoon.